Stuck on the ocean floor. On the night of May 26th, a crew pulling an oil tugboat ran into some tough water and capsized one of them. Due to pirates in the area, everyone was required to have their doors locked at nighttime, which was ultimately their demise, dying before they could escape their locked rooms. Except for one, Harrison O'Kinney, the ship's cook, who at midnight took a bathroom trip. He forced the door open and swam around the swinging ship, panicked because he thought he might die from lack of oxygen, until he found a tiny air pocket in the engineer's office. At this time, he was in only his underwear, 100 feet underwater in a sunken ship with no food and no fresh water. All he had was a single bottle of Coke and 2 flashlights. After a couple days, he could start to hear sharks and fish eating his dead crewmates. Sadly, on the third day, oxygen supply in the little air pocket had reached its limit to keep him alive. Salvage divers had went looking for the bodies of the crew, when out of nowhere, they see a hand, and when the diver grabs it, he freaks out because it squeezes him back. They found a freezing, starving, scared, but alive Harrison O'Kinney. They successfully rescue him and bring him back to the boat to hear his story. He thought he had been there maybe 15 hours at most, but he was actually down there for 3 days. He's vowed to never return to the sea, and honestly, you can't really blame him for that.
What's that? Okay. Alright, you found one, yeah? He's alive, he's alive! Okay, keep him there. Alright, just, alright, just hold him there, okay? Just keep him there. Fuck, no, I don't know what to do. Alright, just keep him there and keep him calm, okay? Alright, just reassure him, pat him on the shoulder. Okay. Alright. Okay, just reassure him, give him a thumbs up and reassure him. Okay, reassure him, keep reassuring him.
Don't forget to tune in next time. We wouldn't want you to miss out on any mysterious content, now would we? This is world-renowned figure skater Nancy Kerrigan, screaming and crying in pain while she grasped her right leg. How did she get here? Nancy Kerrigan had always loved ice skating, knowing her passion from a young age. Her father would sometimes work 3 jobs to fund her figure skating career. At 16 years old, she began to work with the Scofield family, where she trained tirelessly, which ultimately paid off, winning her multiple bronze and silver medals. All the while, a young Tanya Harding was training herself, even dropping out of school to devote more time to her practice, earning her 1991's world silver medalist, along with being one of 2 people to land a triple axel in competition, a triple axel being the hardest jump a figure skater can land. Tanya was a fierce competitor, and with Nancy being the only thing that stood between her and making the 1994 Olympic team, Tanya concocted a plan for her husband to hire a hitman. The plan included slicing Nancy's Achilles. The hitman was too scared and settled to beat her legs with a police baton, leaving Nancy here, scared her career would end. People suspected Tanya at the time, but nobody knew for sure. Nancy healed quick, and they both went on to the Olympics, where Nancy earned a silver medal, and Tanya came in 8th due to a broken shoelace. Nancy entered the Hall of Fame in 2004, while Tanya was stripped of her titles and received a lifetime ban from figure skating.
Something really, really hard. Help me. We're gonna get you to the trainer.
5 interesting stuff. Number 5. You can actually grow a horn on your head, called a cutaneous horn, which is related to how much sunlight and radiation you're exposed to, but it's still not known what causes them for sure. Just know you can get one. Number 4. You may see these videos of birds and their heads staying still, while their bodies are moved around. This head stabilization happens in animals that don't have good eye movement. We have the stabilization built into our eyes. This is why you can move your head left to right and stay focused on a single point, but most birds' eyes can't do that. So to counteract that effect, and still end up with a clear image in the brain, their entire head just stays still. Number 3. Harriet Tubman is known for rescuing slaves, in a time where she would have been burned alive in the streets for it. But what people don't usually know is a slave overseer hit her in the head with a weight for not helping him detain another slave. After receiving no medical attention from this event, she started to develop narcolepsy and signs of schizophrenia, hallucinations, and most importantly, she would sometimes be sent into a trance-like dream state, where she claimed God was telling her to devote her life to freeing slaves. Number 2. This is the oldest teenager in the world, Kane Tanaka, at the ripe young age of 118. Actually, she's the oldest person in the world. And number 1, what you're seeing is the rarely seen sea angel, as it swims off the Russian coast. And despite being categorized as a sea slug and sounding like an ugly family, sea slugs happen to be some of the most beautiful and unique marine species in existence. On August 9th, 1990, 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett was in her mom's bed when she began to kick her. She was asleep and it was an accident, but the good kid she was, when her mom asked her to go to her own bed, she did with no hesitation, falling asleep soon after. The next time Jennifer awoke, she was in the arms of a strange man, with her mouth and nose covered, while he ran down the street. He got her to calm down by telling her he was a police officer, and they would be waiting at the park for her mother to arrive. After about 5 minutes, He took her to a secluded spot in the woods, held her knife to her throat, and asked her if she was scared. He then choked her until she passed out. When she would regain consciousness, he would do it over and over again. While passed out, he assaulted Jennifer's body, then drug her to a field where he left her for dead. Early the next morning, Jennifer's frantic mother couldn't find her anywhere and ended up calling the police. They searched for her and actually came quite close to her. She had somehow survived the attack, but was confused why she couldn't call for help, until she realized the man slit her throat from ear to ear, making it impossible to scream. She would go in and out of consciousness multiple times. Luckily, and unbeknownst to the man that attacked her, he left her laying on top of an anthill, where the ants would bite her repeatedly, keeping her awake, but also keeping her alive. But she wouldn't be found until 14 hours later. Kids were playing nearby when one ran past her and actually tripped over her motionless body. They told the authorities, who took her to the hospital. When they searched the area, they found her clothes and some adult clothes nearby. She recovered enough to write, but wasn't able to speak, and wrote these notes about what happened to her. Through the notes, and some pointing, they got a lot of information out of her. They got a sketch of the man, and even found out the man's name was Dennis. Sadly, even with all the info they had, they couldn't find the man that attacked Jennifer. She went back to daily life, and felt like she always had to look over her shoulder, scared of what happened to possibly happen again, and the case went cold. 19 years passed, and after the cold case was reignited by a new detective, and some DNA samples, a match was found. Dennis Earl Bradford, someone who had previously assaulted a woman and kidnapped another. Dennis said he did it randomly, and also said he didn't know why he did it, but he turned into a savage animal while it happened. While awaiting his trial, at 40 years old, Dennis took his life in his prison cell.
August 10th of 2010, which would have been the 20-year anniversary of my attack, instead of being able to read my victim impact statement in a courtroom, I drove to his gravesite, which is in Texas, and sat there on his gravesite and read my victim impact statement.
Weird women's history. And what would this video be? We didn't start off with the world's fascination with the female body. There used to be a competition for everything, including but not limited to Miss Lovely Eyes beauty contest, the risque beautiful ankle competition, and the pretty popular faceless beauty contest, usually in bathing suits. But with the turn of the 20th century, skincare became important. Things like full face swimming masks caught on for a few years in the 20s to protect from the sun. But no good invention goes without improvement, and in the 40s, still before widespread sunscreen use in the 60s, the freckle-proof cape was gaining traction because freckles were seen as imperfections, because they ruin your appearance, so freckle removal could fix your imperfections right up. Look, I don't know if this worked or if it's dangerous, but it looks like a terrible experience. I think I'd prefer the Max Factor's ice mask. Also, I don't know if this worked either. People just lied and other people just bought that stuff. Kind of like the bust vibrator, even used up into the 70s, that would strengthen and enhance the bust, but after a long day of vibrating, you'd have to go home and run the breast washer a couple times. I'm not sure if just scrubbing your sweaty chest was ineffective in the 1900s, but they seriously had an invention for everything. Want to change at the beach? Boom, portable changing room. Want to lose weight but don't want to stop eating? Boom, tapeworm diet. Big perm machines, big hair dryers, need to dry your hair on the go? Boom, smaller hair dryers. And lastly, attaining the peak beauty of color without those pesky freckles. You had options, like the classic spray tan, or maybe the classic leg painters, which if you wanted both of your legs painted, it was $100 adjusted for inflation. So you could always go with the cheaper option, the stripe down the leg, made it look like you had stockings on. Because if your legs weren't up to the beauty standards, you could always just blame it on the stockings. But hey, even modern history is odd. In 100 years, people are gonna look at this and be like, that's weird.
Time out. Commercial break. Only 7% of you guys are subscribed. Help me change that. 92.4 of you guys subscribe right now while you're watching the video. That way you never miss one of these. Also, feel free to join the Discord down below. Alright, commercial break over.
Stuff that used to be normal. Cocaine. It was used for kids as a sedative. It was easy as saying, my kid's hyper. And the doctor would be like, okay, here's some crack for little Johnny. You could buy it at the store for a toothache. It was accessible as a cough drop. I mean, it wasn't Coca-Cola until 1929. It doesn't get more normalized than that. Now they just use caffeine and 8 pounds of sugar to make the kids go crazy. Speaking of kids, it used to be perfectly normal to ship kids through the mail, and it only cost 15 cents. It was charged the same amount as a normal package. And when you got them delivered, you could put them in their all too popular baby cage, used up into the 1930s. Seriously, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted, at any time, as long as you were white up into the 30s. And if you had money, even better. The rich love showing off decorations, including the garden hermit. In the garden behind your estate, you would have a hermit live there. He wasn't allowed to bathe or clip their nails or cut their hair or do any kind of hygiene. You wanted him as dirty as possible. So when your rich friends came over, they can come gawk at your live hermit decoration. But knowledge was limited. And like I said, you could pretty much do whatever. So kids got these awesome atomic energy labs where they could play with polonium and uranium. Kids were seriously walking around cracked out of their little minds, walking around with radioactive waste. And that may be why Grampy and Great Grampy are a little... Oh yeah, smoking while pregnant was a prescription. So maybe a lotto. Lastly, amusement excursions. And to put this in the very nicest way possible, is when rich people would buy a tour around an insane asylum. They were given a stick and would spend all day poking patients who were usually chained up. The now is weird, but the past is weirder. Xavier Dupont de Ligons. a wealthy, prominent member of his career and community. While French, he was even contacted by the US to make major crime busts. He comfortably sat at the pinnacle of society, is what he led his family to believe. But in fact, he was the CEO of a failed business, was cheating on his wife, had unpaid bills piling up, and his life was falling apart. In April of 2011, he claimed to be contacted by the US to go overseas and take care of business, and would be in witness protection. His entire family was found murdered in their sleep, including the 2 dogs, executed with a rifle that he inherited. They were covered in plastic bags, and bodies were hid under the house porch. At the same time, Xavier went on the run, staying in a cheap motel. The next day, he wakes up, abandons his car, and is caught on hotel surveillance. That CCTV footage would be the last known sighting of him. Xavier is a prime suspect in his family's murder, with the motive of figuring out he was not successful. It's quite possible Xavier is still alive today, even after such a heinous crime, and attempts by multiple countries to identify him. But sadly, his body, or any trace of him, has never been discovered. Traditions, history. It's safe to say marriage is one of the most normalized things a couple can do, as long as they're not the same sex. But the history of the events during marriage have a religious and odd origins, like the bridesmaids wearing the same dress. Believe it or not, on the wedding day, the bridesmaids and the bride would all wear the same dress. It was to confuse demonic spirits, so they wouldn't pick the bride and be tricked into picking one of the bridesmaids. I don't know, I guess demons can't see distance or something. But they would all wear red dresses that symbolized purity until the 1800s, when the queen decided she loved the devil and wore the opposite of pure, white. And then it caught on, and now white means pure, I guess. Purity also being symbolized by the father walking his property down the aisle, the wife being the property, and handing her over to the husband was pretty much handing the deed to her over to the husband. And lastly, the kiss that locks the marriage in place. The priest would give the groom a holy kiss to pass on to the bride. But as the preaching of all gays must burn, they kinda had to stop that, and as time goes on, all the traditions of today will probably become worn out, and new ones will be made. Top 3 close calls with death. Number 3. A couple on a moped are on a night drive, but their night was ruined by a pole when they crashed into it. We can only see the woman because the man flew out of view. Before the impact, they made a slight turn, causing them to fly instead of their bodies crashing into the pole. They were both okay, but probably had to walk home after this. Number 2. And continuing the trend of 2 wheels, a man on a bicycle was slowly crossing the road when another car comes through the junction at high speeds, causing the truck to T-bone him. If this man would have stopped the microwave 1 second earlier this morning, an EMT would have been scraping him off the road. And number 1. A curious child decided he wanted to see what would happen if you throw a firecracker into a sewage system. The manhole is sent flying, and so is the boy, 30 feet into the air. Luckily, kids are made out of Play-Doh, because if this was an adult, they would have exploded on landing, but this boy was virtually unharmed.
Let's
go.
Oh
my god, that was not the right way to do that.
Is he okay?
Are you okay? Are you okay?
The world's oldest, part 3. The oldest thing ever discovered with origins attached to Earth, the zircon crystals. They were discovered in Australia's Jack Hills. Many top researchers have dated the crystals to around 4.375 billion years old, being created only 165 million years after the Earth was formed. Yeah, they look all beautiful, but don't be fooled into buying them unless you have a microscope, because they aren't visible by the naked eye. Moving way forward, the oldest mask ever discovered. Of course, masks were made long before this one, but being made from wood, they're long decomposed. These masks are 9,000 years old, and they took nearly 10 years from carbon dating by experts to determine these masks' authenticity. There are plenty of them, but sadly, they're in the hands of private collectors. The oldest pair of socks, though, you can see in a museum. They're made of Egyptian wool, and if you can't tell, they were specifically made for wearing with sandals. But the oldest shoes discovered are 5,500 years old, made of cowhide. They were preserved when a sheep pooped on them, leaving it in great condition. This is just the right shoe. If the sheep would have pooped a little bit to the left, we could have both of them, but I guess one is good enough. And lastly, the oldest sculpture of a human, or at least a human-like form, found in Germany in 2008. It dates back to around 35,000 to 40,000 years old. It was carved from mammoth ivory. It's said to be a symbol of birth and fertility because of certain exaggerated features. But if I'm being honest with you, that's just a made-up interpretation. It could have been a doll, or a depiction of a god, or even a 40,000-year-old version of a Playboy magazine. Whatever it was most certainly of high value due to the primitive tools and how difficult it would have been to make. The original bodybuilder. Working out has obviously been done throughout history, famously by the Greeks and the Egyptians, but it wasn't normal, and definitely wasn't recreational. Before the 70s in the US, if you were seen running on the sidewalk, you were either crazy or about to be caught by the police. When people started up in the 60s, it was so weird to go on a jog, many newspapers had to remind people everything was okay, and that they were not deranged, but just your average citizens. But even before that, muscular men have always been the highest standard for man's bodies. Enter Eugene Sandow. Born 1867, he's now considered the father of bodybuilding, and the man the Mr. Olympia trophy is actually based off of. Keep in mind, the use of bodybuilding compounds and enhancement drugs that are now so common just didn't exist. He would travel across the world, showing off his muscular physique. He looks like an average strongman to us, but for his time, his body was seen as nearly perfect, and almost the biggest muscles a human can get. And while yes, it does look small compared to today, you have to understand this man was the beginning. Before the 20th century, the lifting part was considered the entertainment. Who could lift the heaviest rocks? Who could pull the most cattle? But Eugene's idea was different. He wanted to see who could create the greatest body, whose body was more symmetrical. After gaining all this attention, in 1901, he decided it was time to display his first bodybuilding contest, and the prize pool was over $5,000. The turnout was amazing, because the show sold out. Over 2,000 people came to see what the human body could achieve with hard work. It seems silly how small in comparison. Probably some people watching this video could have went out there and won, but it really shows how unpopular it was to work out at the time. Afterwards, the winner received their money, and the global propaganda was created to make men and women hate their bodies. But seriously, improvement after improvement was made, showing how little they knew about muscle gain, because take a random bodybuilder from today, and they instantly win all contests. Who knows, as science advances, maybe bodybuilders of the future will one day look like this. Ah yes, the perfect male specimen. Chronic, traumatic, encephalopathy. I can assume you know the once on track to be a football Hall of Famer, Aaron Hernandez, and his roller coaster of a story, killing 4 people, injuring 3 others. It's also notable that over 55% of all crimes committed by an NFL player is domestic abuse related, making people wonder why players worth millions of dollars would throw their lives away. The answer being chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or more commonly known as CTE. A study showed 99% of all NFL players would develop it, but by college, 91% of players would have developed it already. So what is CTE? Only being studied for 15 years now, it's a relatively new discovery, categorized as a progressive degenerate brain disease. Early signs include minor mood swings, having a difficult time concentrating, and even memory loss. But when more developed, spirals into little to no impulse control and extreme aggression. And the older you get, the more prevalent the symptoms. The worst part about CTE is there is no cure. The only known process of developing CTE is repeated hits to the head, the injured area building up proteins. Doctors found the more of this protein buildup, the worse the symptoms of impulse control and aggression seems to be. Another unfortunate activity of this condition is that it's only diagnosable after death, leaving its victims helpless to the symptoms. The youngest confirmed case thus far was a 17-year-old football player. Some doctors speculate that starting football by the age of 12 can increase the odds significantly, but that's really just a guess, as the study's in its infancy. Right now, the only cure for CTE is to not play full contact sports, giving kids who grew up in the worst neighborhoods in America one of the hardest decisions. Stay where you are, and statistically, follow the same impoverished conditions your family has suffered through for hundreds of years, or sign a multi-million-dollar contract with a 99% chance you will lose important brain function by the age of 40. Top 10 best and worst states to live in the US, weighted in this order. For the 10 best, we're starting off very weak with Florida, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Virginia, Nebraska, Idaho, New Hampshire. And with the top 3 best states, we have Utah with the second best economy, then Minnesota, which delivers the best opportunity for citizens. And then number 1, the best state, and I promise you I had nothing to do with this list, but it's where I live, Washington State, ranking pretty high in most things, giving the best overall score. Now time for the worst. Number 10, Kentucky, which actually seems pretty nice in my opinion. South Carolina, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alaska, Alabama, West Virginia, and the top 3 worst states to live in. Number 3, New Mexico. Apparently they have the worst infrastructure. Number 2, Mississippi, who ranks as the worst healthcare, and it's pretty well known they're the most unhealthy state. And number 1, for the worst state to live in, turns out it's Louisiana. They have the worst crime rate, but also ranks in the bottom 4 for every category, aside from fiscal responsibility. Here's every state best to worst. Do you believe this to be accurate?